Hi, so I was just about to make a video on Ben Carlson's endorsement of Donald Trump, but it was kind of a bit too depressing, and my brief words on it would just be ones of sort of dismay and not surprise, but it's just another kick in the teeth basically to non-Trump supporters who actually value intelligence and, you know, actual implementation of policy rather than just rhetoric. Um, and I actually did think a bit more of Ben Carson. I thought he perhaps had some kind of maybe more about him than to just endorse Donald Trump. Maybe if he'd not endorsed anybody, it would be better. Anyway, but instead, I decided to talk about something that's a bit more interesting, which is gun control. And it's really funny because in the UK, it's such a taboo topic, and in fact, all across Europe, like all my European friends. Basically, in Europe, this is a very broad statement, but guns are bad, and that's that. You can't really discuss it. And the reaction I get when I say I support the Second Amendment is quite funny. So it just completely amazes people. Now I also shoot, so I shot today actually. So in the UK you can have sort of gun ranges, but they have to be very tightly controlled in student bodies, like which is mine. I go to the student one, or in proper companies, and you're really only allowed to shoot rifles, not very high power, just sort of lying down, just at targets, obviously. People own land, and farmers, they're also allowed guns to shoot sort of foxes with, even though obviously fox hunting is a big deal here as well. There's a whole problem with that. But they're allowed to protect their land, basically. But I mean, if you shot a person here, even with a rifle, even an intruder, it would obviously be completely legal and you would get tried for murder, or at least manslaughter. So our ban on handguns was in 1995, I do believe, after the Dunblane massacre, which was basically a school shooting. And handguns were just completely banned after a really long campaign from a certain group. But even before that, there was many restrictions. And it's very difficult, to the extent where our Olympic shooters can't even train properly here. It's illegal, so they have to go to Germany to train. It's that bad. Now, the reason I like guns, and I'm happy to admit it, is because, quite simply, I enjoy shooting them. It's fun. I like sort of the idea of it, and I can see why it is a sport completely, why people like hunting, even though I wouldn't hunt. But more than that, I see the need for guns, especially in the US. I mean, people in the UK think it's okay to judge America like it's part of Europe, but it's not. As Marco Rubio always says, America is different, and everyone knows America is different. For a start, geographically and just, scientifically, it's a much bigger landmass. There are more rural areas, there are more people living in rural areas. People actually live off the land, people are isolated and need protection, and people hunt more. It's just generally more culturally accepted. People have grown up with guns and it's perfectly legitimate. They're not going to go out and start hurting people just because they have a gun. That would be ridiculous. Knife crime in the UK is extremely high, and that's what gangs here use. And another big issue is the fact that if you take the guns of good people, law-abiding citizens that use them for sport, protection, just for the sake of having one, just in case, if you take the guns of people like this, it's not going to stop the bad guys getting guns. And this is the main argument against gun control, and it makes complete sense. The criminals are not going to stop getting black market guns. They're not going to stop bringing them over the Mexican border. They're not going to stop buying them off arms dealers or gangs. In fact, the biggest gun crimes happen in places that are gun-free zones. Let's look at the Democrats' lovely example of Chicago or Detroit. What wonderful places these are, especially with gun control. I mean, the example I find most shocking is the army base where it was basically de-armed and a shooter came on. I mean, you're killing US military personnel and they can't even defend themselves when they fight for their country as a living. It's just unbelievable. Even people in the UK and military bases carry arms. So it's becoming a point where it's becoming dangerous to American citizens. And people that say, oh, well, we don't want a complete ban on gun control, we just want more restrictions. That's all fine, well and good to say that. But what type of restrictions do you actually mean? I mean, I actually watched a video of Steve Crowder recently, and it was him going around different gun fairs, gun stores in different states, trying to prove the point that it's not as easy to buy a gun as you may think. Now, it was something to do with the laws in Illinois and Indiana, so obviously every state has different laws, and people were trying to make the point that you can just drive guns over state borders. But the actual fact is, you cannot get the documentation to buy guns from certain states if you're from a different state. So that's complete nonsense. You can't buy a gun in one state if you are from a different state in many, many cases. So the idea of guns moving all over the country, legally purchased guns, or even from gun fairs, is ridiculous. And the amount of paperwork, documentation, and scrutiny that were given in this just one experiment were completely tight. You can't just go around buying guns whenever you want, as people, as liberals, like to make out. And there's also, I mean, we have many, many tragic examples of mass shootings, and that's a terrible, terrible thing, and I can't really defend that. But these are people that are actual maniacs that are going and shooting people. They're not law-abiding citizens. I do believe the argument that if these teachers in schools were carrying guns or were at least armed in some way and trained to do so, they could protect their students and things like this would be prevented. And actual schools are actually starting to carry this out, which I think is the best possible response. But also in the mass media, you don't actually get stories about people who were carrying legal weapons, carrying conceal, that actually managed to fend off their attackers. I mean, I think I read an example about a young girl who was about my age probably, and she was carrying a weapon and she almost got raped and mugged with a gun, and she shot down the perpetrator. I've also heard other stories, many, many the same, about women who wish to carry guns for their own personal protection. And then I've also heard stories about people who were involved in a victim of mass shooting. They were part of the crowd and they were carrying their weapon and managed to pull out their own gun and kill or maim the perpetrator of the crime, and obviously save a lot of innocent lives. And I just think in this age that we're facing of terrorism and uncertainty, to take away people's right to bear arms, which is actually enumerated in the Constitution in the Second Amendment very clearly, it's just utter nonsense. Not only can you undermine the one document that is the fundamental basis of American law, you're taking away people's simple rights that make sense, that protect them. And quite frankly, I don't understand it. Yes, guns are dangerous. Yes, we need to learn more about safety. We need to teach people, but we can't do that if there's a constant liberal agenda to ban guns. Let's teach people how to use them safely. Let's regulate the market. Let's not take guns away from people and put a taboo on them so people are scared to use them. That's my thoughts on that.